Hi, I'm Dr. Helen Myers. I've been a primary care physician here in Boston for, well, over 20 years now. Public hospital. Big one. Busy. We see everything here, every kind of case, every kind of person. You learn a lot. You harden in some ways too. You have to. But even after all these years, there are moments that just stay with you. There's one story in particular I've never really shared, not fully, not because it's too painful, though I won't lie, it is, but because, well, it changed me, changed how I think about this work, about what we can do and what we can't, about being human, really. And for some reason, this morning, I woke up thinking about him again, his face, his voice. I still remember the way he looked at me that last day. I guess it's time to finally talk about it. When people imagine doctors, they often picture us as these confident, all-knowing figures with answers, with solutions. And yes, we study hard, we know a lot, we do our best. But there's this truth no one really talks about sometimes. You just can't help. Not the way you want to. Not enough. And learning to live with that, well, that's one of the hardest parts of this job. Maybe the hardest. I want to tell you about one patient, one man, who taught me that lesson in a way I'll never forget. He wasn't famous, wasn't wealthy, just a working class guy, one of many who come through our doors every day. And he walked into my life at a time when I thought I'd seen it all. I thought I was prepared for anything. I thought I knew what it meant to be a good doctor, but what happened with him shook me. And honestly, it still does. So, if you're watching this, maybe grab a cup of coffee, sit with me for a bit, because I think this is something worth talking about. Not just for doctors, for anyone, really, for anyone who's ever cared. And hey, while you're here, if this kind of story resonates with you, go ahead, you can like the video, maybe leave a comment or even subscribe. I'd love to know your thoughts after you hear this. Alright, let me start from the beginning. So, a little about me. Like I said, I'm Dr. Helen Myers. Born and raised just outside of Boston. Grew up in a family where hard work really mattered. My mom was a nurse. My dad worked in construction. We didn't have a lot, but there was a lot of heart in our home. I guess that's where I first got the idea that helping people was something worth doing. Medicine wasn't a straight path for me, believe it or not. I didn't come from one of those families where everyone's a doctor. I worked my way through school, waited tables, took loans, you name it. But once I got into medical school, and later into internal medicine, I knew I was where I belonged. I started working at this public hospital in Boston when I was 30 after residency. Been here ever since. It's a place that keeps you grounded. Let me tell you, this isn't one of those shiny private clinics with marble floors and soft music in the waiting room. This is real life. People come in because they need help. Sometimes too late. Sometimes in rough shape. Sometimes with no insurance, no safety net. We do what we can. And the pace, well, it's fast. You've got to think on your feet. Juggle a dozen things at once. The waiting room is never empty. The staff, nurses, doctors, techs, we're a team, but it's a constant push. You learn to handle it. You learn what matters, what doesn't. You also learn that patients aren't just charts or lab results. They're people with stories, fears, families. I've always tried to remember that. By the time this story happened, I was 42. I'd been practicing for over a decade. I had seen a lot. Good outcomes, bad outcomes. I'd learned to manage my emotions better. Early on, I used to take every tough case home with me, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about them. But with time, you build some distance. You have to, or you won't last. Still, I think I kept my heart in it. I never wanted to be one of those doctors who stopped seeing the person behind the illness. I guess people would describe me as calm. I listen more than I talk. I pay attention. I'm not big on showing emotions at work, that's just how I'm built, but that doesn't mean I don't feel them. If anything, sometimes the ones who stay quiet feel it the most, you know? Anyway, that was my world. Busy hospital. Endless stream of patients. Long days, sometimes long nights. Coffee-fueled mornings. The kind of work that can wear you down but also give you a strange kind of meaning. And I loved it, still do. Even when it's hard. Maybe especially when it's hard. And then, he came in. This patient. This man. And that one case, it reminded me, in a way I'll never forget, why we can never let ourselves get too numb. Why we can never think we've seen it all. Because sometimes, a single patient can change everything. It was a Tuesday. Funny how some days just stick in your memory. You don't plan for it. You don't wake up thinking, today's going to change me. But sometimes, it just does. I had the early shift that week, started at 7 a.m. Boston was in that late winter phase, cold mornings, gray skies. You know the kind. I remember walking into the hospital that day, grabbing my usual coffee from the corner cart, nodding to the security guard on the way in. Same routine. The halls were already buzzing. Our clinic that morning was packed. Flu season, a lot of respiratory stuff, chronic cases flaring up. My MA, Linda, she's been with me for years, was already prepping charts when I got in. Linda's one of those people who keeps everything moving. Sharp, steady, with this dry sense of humor. We've seen a lot together, her and I. And that morning looked like it was going to be one of those non-stop days, patient after patient, barely time to breathe. I was maybe 3 or 4 patients in when Linda poked her head into my office between cases. "Hey," she said, "we've got a new walk-in. No appointment. Looks rough. You mind taking him?" Of course not. Walk-ins can be anything. Sometimes nothing urgent. Sometimes very serious. You just never know. A few minutes later, she brought him in. Mid to late 30s, I'd say. He looked older though, worn down. Tall, broad-shouldered, but there was a slump to him, like life had been heavy for a while. He had this work jacket on, like he'd come straight from a construction site or a shop. Hands rough, calloused. The kind of guy you just know works hard. He sat down slowly, gingerly, like every movement hurt. And his face. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. Tired, guarded, but also something else. A kind of quiet resignation. Like he knew, or at least suspected, that something was really wrong. I introduced myself, asked his name. "Let's call him John for now, I want to respect privacy." He gave me this little nod. "John," he said, voice low. No energy. I could tell just from those first few seconds, this wasn't going to be a simple visit. When I asked what brought him in, he hesitated. Then he said, almost like an afterthought, "Stomach's been bothering me. Losing weight. Not sleeping much. Kinda. Hurts to eat." But his tone, it wasn't casual. It wasn't, "I think I caught a bug." It was more like, "I'm trying to hold this together." And you know, after you've seen thousands of patients, there are little things you start to notice. The pallor of the skin, the way someone moves, the sound of their breath, the spaces between their words. And something about him just set off every alarm bell in me. Linda caught my eye as she handed me the vital sheet. Blood pressure low, heart rate elevated, way down from what a man his size should have been. And I remember thinking, this is bad. This is more than bad. But I smiled, kept my voice calm. "Okay, John," I said. "Let's talk some more. We'll figure this out. Because that's what you do. You make space for the story to come out. You make space for trust. And that was the start. As we started talking more, little by little, the full picture began to come out. John wasn't one to complain, you could tell that right away. He answered my questions quietly, almost like he didn't want to make a fuss. But the more he spoke, the more concerned I became. He'd been having stomach pain for months, not days, not weeks, but months. At first, he thought it was stress. Work's been busy, he said. He figured maybe some bad takeout, maybe an ulcer. He didn't want to miss shifts. Construction jobs don't exactly hand out paid sick days. So, he pushed through, took antacids, skipped meals when it hurt too much. But now, the pain was constant. He'd lost over 25 pounds in the last couple months. Food barely stayed down. He was exhausted, couldn't sleep from the discomfort. And here's what really struck me, he hadn't seen a doctor in years. No insurance. No regular primary care. Like a lot of working folks, he just didn't come in unless he absolutely had to. I ran through the exam, carefully. Abdomen tender, some rigidity. His skin tone was pale, with that faint yellowish tinge. You don't want to see that. And when I palpated deeper, I could feel it, a mass. Firm. Fixed. Right there in the upper abdomen. My heart sank. We ordered labs, stat, full panel. I pushed for an urgent CT scan, called down myself to radiology to explain. We had to move fast. But I knew, even before the labs came back, even before the scan, this wasn't going to be simple. What wasn't going as planned? Well, first, the timing. The wait times for imaging in a public hospital can be brutal, even when you flag it as urgent. The system's stretched thin. You fight for every slot. Second, John didn't have support. No family in the room. No one with him. You could tell he wasn't used to asking for help. And third, the clock. Whatever this was, it wasn't early. His symptoms had been going on too long. That afternoon felt like a race against something invisible, trying to get answers before things got worse. We got the blood work first. Anemia, significant. Liver enzymes elevated. Tumor markers, high. I remember sitting there, staring at those numbers, feeling this growing knot in my stomach. And then the CT results came back. I'll never forget reading that report. Large gastric mass, suspicious for malignancy. Involvement of regional nodes. Possible liver mets. Advanced. I remember just sitting there for a moment, hands still on the keyboard, the weight of it hitting me. This wasn't just bad. This was too late bad. And now the dilemma was forming in my head fast. How do I tell this man? This strong, proud guy who's worked his whole life, who waited too long to come in because life left him no choice. How do I tell him that this is probably cancer and that we might not be able to help him the way he needs? How do I do that and still give him hope, or at least dignity? And more, how do I move this forward when the system itself is full of roadblocks? He needed an oncologist, fast. He needed more imaging. He needed staging, biopsies. But even urgent referrals take time. Time he didn't seem to have. That's when the stress really started to build. Inside, I was running through scenarios. How can I push this case? Who can I call? What strings can I pull? And how do I prepare him for what's coming? It was one of those moments where the room feels too small, the clock too loud, where the weight of being the doctor feels heavy. I knew I couldn't wait. Not with what the scan showed. Not with how fast his symptoms were progressing. I asked John to come back the next morning early so we could talk through the results in person. I wanted time to gather resources, to line up oncology, to have at least some kind of plan ready. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about him, about how he'd sat there on that exam table, trying to stay composed while clearly in pain, about the way his eyes had met mine when I'd said, "We need to look into this more carefully." Like he already knew, but didn't want to know. You could feel the weight of unspoken things between us. The next morning, he was there before I even arrived, sitting in the hallway outside the clinic, coffee cup in hand. Same worn jacket, same tired eyes. When I brought him into the room, he sat down slowly and looked straight at me. "It's bad, isn't it?" he said quietly. No small talk, no pretending. Just right to the heart of it. And that was the moment. The one I won't ever forget. The room seemed to still. The usual noise of the clinic, voices, phones, monitors, it all faded. It was just the two of us, sitting across from each other, and suddenly I wasn't just his doctor anymore. I was the person who had to speak a truth that would change everything for him. I took a breath, studying myself. You practice these conversations in med school. You role-play them, but nothing prepares you for when it's real. For when the words in your mouth will land like bricks on someone's life. I started gently. "John, the scan shows a mass in your stomach. It's large. It's very concerning. And some of the nearby lymph nodes look involved." I paused, watching his face. No tears. Just a slight tightening around the eyes, a clenched jaw. He nodded once. "There's also some spots on the liver that we need to look at more closely," I added. "I'm so sorry, but this looks like an advanced cancer." Silence. A long one. He stared at the floor, then back at me. "So, what does that mean? What happens now?" His voice was steady, but quiet. And here came the hardest part, because I didn't have good answers. I told him we'd move as fast as we could, referrals to oncology, more tests to confirm the staging, discussions about treatment options. But inside, I knew we were already late. The window was closing fast. He took another deep breath. "You know, I figured it was something like that," he said. I could feel it, but I didn't want to stop working. Bills don't pay themselves, right? He gave this little half smile, no humor in it, just tired acceptance. That hit me hard. And then he looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "Doc, just tell me straight. Am I going to die from this?" And that was the moment that broke me a little. You can't say no, not truthfully. But you also can't take away all hope. It's a line you walk, thin as a thread. I swallowed, kept my voice calm. "We're going to do everything we can," I said. "But yes, this is serious. Very serious." He nodded again, eyes glistening now, though he didn't cry. Just sat there quietly, absorbing it. And in that moment, watching the strong man, who'd carried so much alone, face the hardest truth of his life, something shifted in me. A part of me that thought I'd seen it all, hadn't. A part of me that thought I could always help, realized sometimes you can't. Not enough. That was the moment I'll never forget. After that conversation, everything moved fast, or as fast as the system allowed. I pushed every referral, called in favors where I could. Our oncology team got involved right away. We scheduled a biopsy, additional imaging. John came to each appointment on time. Never complained, never asked, "Why me?" Just showed up, did what needed doing. There was a quiet strength in that. But every time I saw him, the changes were more visible. The weight loss, the fatigue. His skin grew more sallow, the circles under his eyes deeper. You could see it was taking a toll. The final diagnosis confirmed what we feared, stage 4 gastric cancer with liver metastases. The oncology team explained the options. Not curative. Palliative chemo, aimed at slowing progression, easing symptoms. It wasn't an easy conversation. But John faced it the same way he'd faced everything else, with his quiet, steady resolve. "I just want to buy some time," he told me one afternoon. Enough to get my affairs in order. Maybe see my sister, she's out west. Haven't seen her in years. It was simple and so human. Not a fight for a miracle cure. Just time. And so, he started treatment. The first few weeks were rough, side effects hit hard. Nausea, fatigue. But he kept coming, never missed a session. The nurses loved him, called him one of the bravest patients they'd seen. And he'd smile, shake his head, say, "Just doing what I can." I saw him often during that time. We talked more. He opened up a little, told me about his life. Working construction since his early 20s. Never married. No kids. A sister in California. Some old friends here in Boston. He wasn't bitter. Just wished he'd come in sooner. That part stuck with me. But despite the treatment, despite all efforts, the disease was moving faster than we could fight it. Within 3 months, he was weaker. More pain. More weight loss. He was admitted for symptom management more than once. And each time, it was harder for him to bounce back. One afternoon, maybe 4 months after that first visit, Linda came to find me. "John's back," she said softly. "ED brought him in overnight. He's asking for you. I want to see him." He was in a hospital bed this time, thinner, frilier, but his eyes still clear. He reached for my hand when I came in. "Doc," he said quietly, "I think this might be it." I sat with him for a long time that day. No rush, no charting, just there. He told me he'd gotten to talk with his sister on the phone. Made some peace. "I'm ready," he said at one point. I just didn't want to go without saying thanks. And I'll tell you, hearing that, it's humbling. To be there in someone's last chapter, to be trusted in that space, it stays with you. It changes you. John passed away a few days later, peacefully, with good palliative care. His sister was able to come before the end. I'm glad for that. For me, well, the case didn't resolve in the way we always hope. We didn't cure him. We couldn't. But I think we gave him dignity, some comfort, some control in a situation that offered very little. And for a man like him, that mattered. It also left me with questions that still echo, about timing, about access to care, about the gaps in the system, about how many more Johns are out there, waiting too long, trying to be strong, until it's too late. And that's something I still think about. After John passed, I'll be honest, it stayed with me. Still does. In this line of work, you see loss. It's part of it. But some patients, some moments, they mark you in a different way. For weeks after, I'd catch myself thinking about him, walking past the waiting room, seeing the empty chair where he used to sit. Little things. And that quiet conversation we had about time, about dignity, it echoed in my mind. I think what hit me hardest was this simple truth. No matter how good you are, no matter how hard you work, sometimes you can't change the outcome. And learning to live with that, without it hardening you, is one of the hardest lessons in medicine. I also found myself thinking about the system, about how many people fall through the cracks. Good people, hardworking people like John, who wait too long because life doesn't give them the space to stop and take care of themselves. That thought still weighs on me. If he'd come in earlier, maybe it could have been different. But that's the maybe we live with, isn't it? It also reminded me why we do this. Why even when we can't cure, we can still care. We can still give time, honesty, compassion. That matters more than people think. And, personally, I think it made me a little softer again. After so many years in this job, it's easy to build walls to protect yourself from too much feeling. But after John, I reminded myself, don't stop seeing the person in front of you. Don't let the pace or the pressures numb you. Every patient deserves to be seen, really seen. I'll never forget him. I still think of him, Sometimes, when I sit down with a patient who's been putting things off, who's scared to come in, I take an extra moment. I listen a little deeper, because you never know, that one conversation might change everything. What did I take from all of this? I think, more than anything, it reminded me that medicine isn't just about fixing things. Sometimes we can't fix, but we can be there. We can listen. We can offer honesty, presence, and respect. And for many patients, especially in their hardest moments, that matters. It matters more than perfect outcomes or statistics. It also taught me, again, the importance of timing, of not waiting, and it made me more aware of how many barriers people face: work, money, fear, things that keep them from walking through our doors sooner. I try now, when I can, to encourage those conversations earlier, to create space where patients feel safe coming in before it's too late. And maybe it softened me in a good way, reminded me that no matter how long you do this, you can't lose the human part. You can't let the system, or the pace, or the hard cases turn you cold. We owe it to our patients and to ourselves to stay connected, to keep seeing the whole person, not just the illness. That's what I carry forward from John's story. It's not a simple lesson. It's not an easy one, but it's real. And I think it's worth sharing. What happened after? Well, in the hospital world, cases come and go, and the days keep moving. There's always another patient, another chart, another shift. But some stories stay under the surface. The team remembered John. The nurses talked about him for a while, how brave he'd been, how kind, even when things were hard. Little details like that matter in a place like this. They remind us why we do the work. For me personally, I wouldn't say this story became some kind of legend. That's not how it works. But it did change me. Quietly, deeply. It made me more aware, more tuned in to the stories my patients aren't always saying out loud. Now, when someone downplays their symptoms or shrugs something off, I lean in a little more. I ask a few more questions. I remind myself not to assume. It also made me more of an advocate in the small ways that count. I push a little harder now when I see someone slipping through the cracks. I make the extra phone call, flag the chart, check in with the social worker. It's not dramatic, not flashy, but sometimes those small actions help move things along faster. And sometimes, faster is what makes the difference. I've had other tough cases since John. You always will in this job. But his story stays with me in a particular way. Maybe because of how human it was. Maybe because of how quietly strong he was. Or maybe because it reminded me, we're not just here to treat illness. We're here to walk with people through some of the hardest moments of their lives. And that's not something you ever forget. So, that's the story I wanted to share. Not an easy one. Not a simple one. But one that stayed with me all these years. And maybe that's the point. In medicine and in life, not everything ties up neatly. Not every story ends the way we hope. But even in the hardest moments, there's something we can offer each other: time, honesty, kindness. If there's one thing I hope people take from this, it's not just about doctors or hospitals. It's about paying attention to your health, yes, but also to the people around you. We never really know what someone's carrying. Sometimes the strongest looking people are the ones struggling the most underneath. And if you're watching this, maybe ask yourself, when was the last time you really listened to your own body? When was the last time you stopped and took care of yourself before it became urgent? It's easy to put it off. Life is busy, and we tell ourselves, I'll get to it later. But sometimes, later is too late. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever known someone, maybe even yourself, who waited too long to seek care? What stopped them? What would have helped? Leave a comment below. I really do read them, and sometimes these shared stories help all of us see things a little differently. Thank you for spending this time with me.